Welcome to the Undaunted Man podcast. If you're a father watching your son quietly disengage from school, a young man who feels increasingly invisible, or a woman carrying an unsustainable emotional and logistical load alone, this episode is for you.
And I'm Geoff Laughton.
And I'm Mark Johnson. We're the co-founders of the Undaunted Man. We work with men through wilderness experiences, private coaching, and intensive group work to help them confront what's actually happening and rebuild with clarity.
So today, we're synthesizing some core findings from two foundational scholars, Paul Nathanson and Katherine Young, into one coherent picture. We examine these patterns with discernment, trying to distinguish specific currents of contempt from the broader movement, separating evidence from ideology, then laying out the concrete steps we apply with our clients.
No exaggeration, just the evidence and the practical path forward.
And I want to point out that you'll find everything that we're referencing today at www.theundauntedman.com. Also, you can find more on our Substack, our X feed, and Instagram. Links are in the show notes. So, with all that cool shit out of the way, let's begin. So, what's striking, Mark, from the work that you've been doing and researching, and what requires real discernment, is how thoroughly Nathanson and Young mapped the atmospheres we've all been breathing for the last several years. In Spreading Misandry, which they published in 2001, and Legalizing Misandry, which came out in 2006, Nathanson and Young cataloged mainstream culture from the late 1990s, which we're way older enough to remember, from the late 1990s onward, films, TV, advertising, greeting cards, opinion writing. And what they found and showed in their work was a very consistent pattern. Ordinary men were routinely portrayed as either predators, incompetent fools, technical term for doofus, or redeemable only when they shed recognizable male traits and became what they called honorary women. The recurring cultural message was blunt. The only good man is a dead man or a woman.
And one of the most revealing elements they expose is how the value of masculinity, men, and boys is almost exclusively framed in terms of how they impact women, as if they possess no independent worth or purpose outside of serving women's needs, advancing female interests, or disappearing altogether. Discernment here means seeing this framing for what it is without assuming it defines every voice in the broader conversation.
Now, over time, what we've noticed is that framing didn't stay just in entertainment. It translated over the 20 some odd years since their work was published. It's translated directly into policy and law. Disparities in sentencing for identical crimes, for example. Family courts that position fathers as optional visitors rather than an essential parent. And institutional norms that made questioning certain gender narratives professionally risky.
For boys, the message lands early and repeatedly. Typical male behaviors, physical play, risk-taking, protective instincts, are reframed as problems to be corrected rather than traits to be directed. Nathanson and Young put it plainly. when a culture systematically removes any positive, publicly honored male identity, boys and men are left with two narrow paths: withdraw completely or react with anger.
Now, part of why we're talking about this today, and this is a definite shift in what the kinds of episodes we've been recording, but put quite simply, why we're talking about this and why this is so important in our minds is because we see both of these patterns consistently in the men that show up in our community and that are in our community. They arrive, usually, carrying a deep, often unspoken sense of unease that their very maleness has been prejudged as problematic. The scholars warned that this was not just harmless satire. It was the deliberate teaching of contempt. And once it becomes ambient, it migrates into law, education, and policy with measurable consequences for both our men and the boys that are coming up. Discernment, and this is really the thing that we're cohering around, discernment keeps us from either denying the pattern when it ought not be denied or turning it into a blanket accusation against every perspective, which when we go there, it's literally indefensible.
When you sit with their full body of work, you end up with a really clear picture, provided we exercise discernment while we're looking at it. Nathanson and Young identified the permission structure that reframes typical male traits as suspect, then documented how that structure embeds itself in the very institution boys and men encounter daily. I mean, we could spend half an hour just simply listing examples. My favorite two popular references in this regard are, I highly recommend everyone watch the documentary film that came out 10 years ago or so now, I think, called The Red Pill, by a feminist documentarian named Cassie J. And that's in terms of if you want hard stats to back up what we're saying here. And Nathanson and Young also have they've written 4 books on this topic. They've got endless statistics and real world examples on top of that. And then if you want to understand how men are portrayed in popular culture, just go back and watch the old sitcom According to Jim.
Oh my God.
Because his wife, played by Courtney Thorne Smith, was beautiful and competent and basically a total badass. And Jim, portrayed by Jim Belushi, was a bumbling, fat idiot, basically a walking live action Homer Simpson. Even in The Simpsons, Homer's a dumbass and Marge is the smart one. What's the guy? I never watched The Simpsons much. What was the kid's name? I mean,
Bart.
Bart was a troublemaker, and his sister was this sophisticated intellectual that pulled his ass out of the fire. I mean, endless. It's been endless. So the result is a generation growing up with preemptive shame around their instincts, higher barriers in family legal systems, and a quiet but pervasive sense that their contributions are either optional or dangerous, and always measured first by their utility to women rather than by any intrinsic value of their own, which is existentially about the most devastating thing that you can do to any person. When you tell them that they don't have value, intrinsically, when you tell them they don't have intrinsic value or that their intrinsic value is less, it's hard to imagine anything more evil or discouraging.
Yeah, which, again, we both agree that this is one of several variables creating the quote-unquote crisis in men and boys' lives. And look, we want to emphasize that these trends we're talking about, we do not believe for a moment that they negate the true challenges women continue to face. What we're arguing for is stronger and more refined discernment, and discernment demands that we acknowledge that reality. It's pretty fucking difficult to be a human no matter what's between your legs. At the same time, the trends we're talking about intensify the challenges. When boys internalize early on that their natural drives are liabilities, well, then future partnerships and families inherit that fracture. When men encounter institutional defaults that devalue their role, women end up carrying a disproportionate load. And then the whole system becomes lopsided and heavier for everyone. Now, the real strength of Nathanson and Young's scholarship is that it doesn't just end in diagnosis. They're not just articulating the problem. They actually write quite a bit about a path towards restoration. How do we fix this? How do we shift this? And those are the exact steps that we implement in everything we do, our programs, our retreats, our groups. Discernment is the tool that makes restoration of the balance of everybody having intrinsic value possible.
So, in our groups and in our coaching and on our wilderness experiences, we begin exactly where Nathanson and Young recommend. We begin by cleaning up the narratives to reflect reality, to reflect the objective truth that men have equivalent intrinsic value to women, and that healthy masculinity is equally as valuable and as important as healthy femininity. So we caution people about the media and the books that they consume. Pay attention, if you're parents, to what the schools are teaching your sons and daughters, and make sure that they replace patterns of contempt or negative portrayals of the male sex across history. When one group is demonized and another is lionized, it creates fractures. And the individual consequences are pretty devastating.
I think it bears saying at this point, before I make another point, is what Mark just said, and again, why this is something that we're so passionate about, and why all our work centers around discernment and authenticity, is because if we don't shift this, it's just another area where there's division. A bankrupt zero-sum paradigm keeps going, and there's no chance to begin shifting a paradigm that's been a problem for centuries. not always around gender identity or gender roles and all that, but my stuff is better than your stuff, or I like your stuff. Goes right back to third grade. I'll trade you a Twinkie for your peanut butter cup. There's always something that is better than something else. But when we're talking about humans and intrinsic value, not to even begin mentioning that, for those who believe in God or, religion, spirituality, what have you, I don't really see how further division and separating people into one category or another creates anything but more division. So, towards that end, we also follow the call for sustained intersexual dialogue, not debate, but genuine listening in homes, groups, and communities. Mark and I are always, I work with a lot of women in my coaching practice, but Mark and I make it a practice to do the best we can to tap into not only engaging with some of the top women that are out there right now, including Alison Armstrong, who we can't recommend highly enough as a scholar in all this that we're talking about. We're we're assiduously trying to avoid getting lost in our own echo chamber, right? So the dialogue between all peoples becomes essential. Men describe the weight they carry. Women practice hearing it without prejudgment. We run these practices in every retreat and watch men regain, as we do, they get their sovereignty back. They get their agency back. They really release kind of the chains and the burden that come with it of, I'm a man, therefore I must be a member of the great unwashed.
And it's important to note, none of this requires waiting for broader cultural consensus. As a matter of fact, it's crucially important that we don't wait for broader cultural consensus. Cultural consensus is made up of individual action. So you can start today at theundauntedman.com through our programs and track the difference directly in your own life and family.
So as we are in the midst of so much division and war, and there's no need to run down the list of all the signs of what's happening worldwide that illustrate the cost, the real tangible costs to lives and cultures and traditions that what we're talking about has helped create. So we believe wholeheartedly that contempt is not an inevitable condition. It's a relatively recent cultural development that can be addressed.
And by replacing it with mutual recognition, this is not about elevating men above women or taking women down a peg. This is about recognizing that we intrinsically we all have the same value, and that masculinity and femininity are both equally important and equally necessary for human thriving. So by restoring this positive male identity and treating dialogue as a disciplined practice, we create the conditions where masculine and feminine contributions stand clearly and complement each other. We are the healthy masculine and the healthy feminine are perfectly harmonious halves of a divinely created whole. And to the degree to which we see each other as obstacles or the enemy is the degree to which we have all this social and relational conflict. So everything we do is grounded in principle. It's love grounded in seeing each other clearly, and purpose grounded in building. This work demands ongoing discernment, the ability to see the pattern clearly without falling into the same reductionism we've been describing.
So our hope and our intention is that this episode has clarified something for you. And if it has, then we want to recommend 3 concrete steps that you can take right now. Share this video with even one person. Select and apply any one of the approaches we've described today. Try it out, practice it, implement it, see what happens. And visit theundauntedman.com, our Substack, X, or Instagram to share what action you're taking. It's lovely if you keep it private. It makes more of a difference if you share. Because one thing the Undaunted Man is built on is the value of community. And all of you out there, whether you're male or female, you're part of the human community. And that's really ultimately who Mark and I are dedicated most to serving. So please share what action you take. Even better, share what comes out of it, good, bad, or indifferent. And know that we will review every response and reply to every response. So we thank you for listening. Please stay committed to what's true. Face the reality. Take the necessary action. Those 3 things in and of themselves are a winning formula. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back.
Thanks for listening.